And I want to ask our good friend, Senator Robert Menendez, to please come forward.
Muy buenas noches, gracias Malcolm por esa felicitación, esa presentación y por reconocerme con este honor. Es un placer estar aquí con los amigos americanos del Recipient. And for those of you other than my friend Luis Pons, who's probably would be, the rest of you would be terrorized, I might continue for the next few minutes in Spanish. Let me say thank you very much. Malcolm, thank you for your very gracious introduction, and more importantly for your leadership, each and every day. When you are not in Malcolm's presence, I can tell you what he and the council are in the midst of doing in promoting the U.S.-Israel relationship. He's an extraordinary individual, and we are fortunate both as Americans and for those of you of Jewish descent to have him as a leader. So Malcolm, thank you very much. Let me thank the American Friends of the Likud for bringing us together and for the recognition. Your national chairman, Ken Abramowitz, your president, Jerry Platt, your executive director, Adam Fishman, who does a great job, and the members of the board. Mr. Minister, congratulations on your recognition. Your introducer piqued my interest, so I went to my memo, and I saw that you're only 37 years old, so I am jealous. You have had an extraordinary period of time, and I think there's much more to come, so congratulations on the recognition as well. And let me also recognize the many dignitaries from around the world who have been introduced tonight and are here for Israel. It's an honor to be in such distinguished company. And it's a distinct honor to receive the Menachem Begin's Courage Award for Political Courage. But let me just say, in my view, it doesn't take courage to be outspoken about the importance of the unshakable bond between the United States and Israel. A bond that has its roots in the histories of our two nations and endures because of our nation's shared values and commitments. For me, for 21 years as a member of the Congress, first in the House of Representatives and then in the Senate, representing a district in the days of my House of Representatives that had far more Palestinians and Arabs than it had members of the Jewish community. As a matter of fact, to give you a flavor of what that congressional district was like, the sheikh that was involved in the First World Trade Center bombing had his mosque 2 blocks away from my congressional district office. And that is a district that I represented 14 years before coming to the Senate. And I said then, in the midst of protests, and I continue to say 21 years later, that it is in the national interests and security of the United States to have a strong, unwavering relationship with the one democracy in a sea of autocracy, a major trading partner of the United States, a major security ally of the United States, and the one country most likely to be voting with us in common cause in international forums, and that is the state of Israel. And so for 21 years, I have held that consistent view even when it was not politically propitious. To me, when Prime Minister Begin's visit in 1978 came about, it was said, Israel's achievements are uniquely its own, a mixture of high idealism, ingenuity, and self-reliance. Americans have always found an echo of our own frontier in the past in Israel's energy and its strong individualism. As the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I know its combination of that idealism, ingenuity, self-reliance, and shared values that are the foundation of the U.S.-Israel relation. On that same visit, in the lead-up to the Camp David Accords, Menachem Begin touched on the essence of our unique relationship. He said, Israel is a very small country, The United States is a mighty world power. But there are bonds which tie us together in understanding and friendship which derive from our tradition, from our faith in divine providence, from our love of liberty, from our devotion to democracy. These are the values that make life worthwhile to live. Much has transpired since the Camp David Accords, and the world is a different place. But the sentiment about the U.S.-Israel relationship remains unchanged. As we contemplate our shared commitment to Israel's success and prosperity as the only democratic country in the Middle East, I often wonder what sort of Middle East Israel will find itself going forward. Will governments in the region seize the mantle of leadership and demonstrate a commitment to democratic transition? Or will these societies continually be destabilized, driven by mass protests and violence as regimes resist political and economic reform? In short, will the new Middle East be an incubator of 21st century democracies like Tunisia? Or will it be relegated to the dustbin of Iran-like fundamentalist theocracies bent on turning back the clock 500 years? Will it be free of brutal dictators and look to leaders who can set a foundation for free and open societies? Or will violent extremists seize the narrative and drive the notion that change can only come through violence and bloodshed? The history of the Middle East at the beginning of the 21st century is yet to be written. The history of Israel, however, is written in the strength of its democratic values and its unwavering place as America's most important partner in the region. So what we do know of the new Middle East is that Israel will remain a democratic anchor, and there will be no daylight between the United States and Israel, and certainly no daylight as long as I am the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We will continue to ensure that we remain united by those values to deal with whatever blooms from the Arab Spring, whether threats it poses or opportunities it presents. Though the road to peace that Israel has always sought is fraught with obstacles at every turn, I think about the statements that Prime Minister Netanyahu said during a recent conference in Washington, where he previewed for us what a new Middle East could look like. It would be a Middle East in which a broader peace would have a positive spillover in the entire region. Prime Minister Netanyahu himself emphasized this at AIPAC when he said, quote, "Peace would open up the possibility of establishing formal ties between Israel and leading countries in the Arab world, a combination of Israeli innovation and Gulf entrepreneurship, to take one example." He spoke of improving the region's water and energy situation, improving agriculture, improving education with e-learning, and improving health with diagnosis on the internet. He suggested that Israel could help its Arab neighbors make scientific, agricultural, and technological advances that would help everyone prosper economically. The new Middle East could be a thriving place where the entrepreneurship of Dubai and Doha and the innovative skills and educational investments of Israel would help Arabs and Israelis build better, safer, more prosperous and secure lives for themselves and their neighbors. But notwithstanding the Prime Minister's recent statements, and notwithstanding our genuine hope that those words could one day become a reality, the bottom line remains as clear to me as it has always been. There can be no existential threat to Israel from their neighbors. There can be no fantasy of flooding Israel with refugees, no movement to amputate parts of the Negev and the Galilee. Notwithstanding any hopes we harbor, one thing is certain, and in my view, set in stone. President Abbas, or whoever leads the Palestinian Authority, must recognize the Jewish state as a Jewish state without equivocation. The Palestinian government must also renounce terror. They must honor its past commitments, and they must find its own source of courage to lead the Palestinian people towards peace in a two-state context. In an ideal world, with an Israeli-Palestinian diplomatic breakthrough would come problem-solving, investment, entrepreneurship, and from that we would emerge the new Middle East that we all want to see. But let me close by making 4 points as it relates to where I stand. First, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I reject any movements which call for a boycott or divestment from Israel, and any comment that suggests Israel runs the risk of becoming an apartheid state. Those are wrong, they are flawed, and they are unconscionable for this chairman. Second, President Abbas and whoever comes out of this attempt to form a unity government must choose between a future that envisions a two-state solution, with Israel as a Jewish state having peace and security, and a Palestinian state with prosperity for the Palestinian people, or a marriage with a terrorist organization that will never achieve that dream. The marriage with Hamas under U.S. law has consequences, and that message must be abundantly clear. We will act on the consequences if that is true. 3, and the most important, maybe pressing issue of our time. As we move forward to the possibility of a deal with Iran, a deal that I frankly am very nervous about. I have been outspoken and confronted some in my own party because I believe we need the right deal, not any deal for the sake of having a deal. Let me be clear. I believe that it is of the utmost importance to reassert that an Iran with a nuclear weapons capability would be an existential threat to the state of Israel. Iran would also be emboldened to take even more aggressive actions throughout the region. The regime already persists in supporting, financing, and exporting terror, sending fighters to Syria to prolong what has become a humanitarian disaster on enormous proportions, fomenting extremism in Iraq and Yemen, and propping up Hezbollah and Hamas. A nuclear Iran could unleash an arms race in the world's most dangerous tinderbox. We need to be absolutely clear that it is the unequivocal policy of the United States to do everything in its power to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapon capability, and absolutely clear that we reject policy options designed simply to contain a nuclear-armed Iran or mothball its nuclear infrastructure. Our clear intention must be to prevent Iran from ever reaching that capability. And it is because of that reason that I introduced the third round of sanctions, the Menendez-Kirk legislation, and I still believe that it is necessary to assure our goal of making sure that Iran never has the nuclear weapon capability that we risk. Finally, let me conclude, as I have many times before Jewish groups, and most importantly, before non-Jewish groups. Having Israel's back means fighting back on the efforts to delegitimize the Jewish state. The Holocaust was the most sinister possible reminder that the Jewish population in exile was in constant jeopardy. But let us be very clear that while the Shoah has a central role in Israel's identity, it is not the reason behind its founding, and it is not the main justification for the existence of the Jewish state. Several thousands of years of history lead to an undeniable conclusion. The reestablishment of the state of Israel in modern times is a political reality, with roots going back to the time of Abraham and Sarah and historical texts and articles. The argument for Israel's legitimacy does not depend on what we say in speeches. It has been made by history. It has been made by the courage of the men and women who have turned the desert green, by Nobel Prizes earned, by groundbreaking innovations and enviable institutions, by lives saved, democracy defended, peace made, and battles won. These are the ones we should honor for their courage. John Kennedy wrote in his famous book, Profiles in Courage, "In whatever arena of life one meets the challenge of courage, whatever may be the sacrifices he faces if he follows his conscience, loss of his friends, his fortune, his contentment, even the esteem of his fellow man, each man must decide for himself the course he will follow." The stories of past courage can define that ingredient. They can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot provide courage itself. For this, each man, and I would say each woman, must look into their own soul. There can be no denying the courage of the Jewish people. And as I look into my own soul, I know there can be no denying the Jewish people their legitimate right to live in peace and security in a homeland for which they have had a connection of thousands and thousands of years. And for so long as I am the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that is the view that we will lead that committee from. Thank you very much. Shalom.